I'm the Rangi Ramacharaka, and I have good news. The good news is that endless literary controversy is for sluggard minds, and it is a distraction. Sluggardly mindedness, then, probably gets us involved in distraction. We don't have to be involved in distraction or sluggardly mindedness. But we can if we want to. We can be if we want to. Because distraction is all over the place. So is endless literary controversy, and so is sluggardly mindedness. The good news is, if we want to be involved in those, we can. It's there to be involved in. It's all around. That's good news, if that's what we want. If we don't want to, well, then we don't have to, and that's good news too. Now, let me give a few examples of endless literary controversy, sluggardly mindedness, and distraction. All right. I didn't plan a script for this, so I'm going to wing it, as I usually do here. Here goes. All right, endless literary controversy. I grew up in a family that was involved in a Protestant sect, almost cult-like sect, called Plymouth Brethrenism. It's not the Plymouth, or it's not the Brethren, the Church of Brethren, Church of God, or whatever. No, this is a different animal. The Plymouth Brethren. There are 5, 6, maybe 7 sub-sects of Plymouth Brethrenism. There are many people who never heard of Plymouth Brethrenism. So if you want to look it up, look it up. It's there to be looked up. You can find information about Plymouth Brethrenism on the internet. But you don't have to. You can take my word for it. I grew up in a family that was deeply involved in Plymouth Brethrenism. One of the 6 or so sub-sects of Plymouth Brethrenism. One of the characteristics of Plymouth Brethrenism is that they were biblical literalists. They are biblical literalists. Now, I say I grew up in it. I do not subscribe to Plymouth Brethrenism today. But I grew up in a family that did. At least my father did. And he imposed it upon the family. Now, as I say, one of the defining characteristics of Plymouth Brethrenism is that they were very biblical literalists. This means that they took the King James Version of the Bible to be literal. Every word, literally true. The King James Version, the King James Authorized Version. This means that King James, one of British royalty, several hundred years ago, I guess, it was several hundred years ago, one of the inbred members of British royalty, probably a psychopath. I'm not certain, but probably a psychopath. Definitely with an agenda that had to do with the control of humanity. Authorized this edited, revised version of the Bible in the English language to be the standard. Plymouth Brethren take that revision, that authorized edition of the Bible to be the literal, to contain literal truth straight from God's mouth, word for word in English. From beginning to end, from the first word to the last word, the entirety of the Bible, literally true. The most literal translation you can put on it is the true one, is the one that came from God's mouth. It is the truth. It is what they call the Word of God. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Okay, so God said these words through some mediums or channels, however you want to call them. Prophets, mediums, channels. I don't know what they were doing, how they were getting this information. Channeled, mediums, holding seances, I don't know, and I don't care. But anyway, Another characteristic of Plymouth Bretheranism is that there were no preachers, no ministers, no pastors, no priests. There's no seminary to go to. There's no college to go to. There's no requirement to speak and preach, if you want to call it preaching. They don't call it preaching. They just call it talking. All the men within the meeting, we didn't call it a church, within the meeting, wherever you find the meeting, whatever town you go to, there might be a Plymouth Brethren meeting. It might be in somebody's living room. It might be in a little chapel somebody built. My father was one of the two people who built the meeting room that we attended when I was a child. All the men could talk if and only if, they were accepted as being allowed to talk by the other men who were allowed to talk. So this would mean that the person who's under consideration for acceptance into the meeting to be allowed to talk had to be male and had to think like the people who were already accepted into the meeting to be able to talk. This indicates that it was a very closed system of thought. And add to this very narrow, closed system of thought the fact that they were taking the words of the King James Bible to be literally true. You would think that there would be agreement over what the Bible says. That there would not be endless literary controversy over what the Bible means, over what each of its parts are trying to say, or are saying, the meanings. And yet, there was endless literary controversy. I heard it. All the cross-referencing, all the debate, sometimes heated, all the disagreements, all the stuff that just didn't make sense, especially when disagreements got going over what this part means, over what this passage means, over what this verse says. You'd think there wouldn't be that going on. But it was going on for long periods of time over the same passages. You'd think that it wouldn't happen in such a closed system of thought, in such a closed circle of people who carefully select who's even allowed to talk over something that is taken to be literally true, a very exoteric interpretation of words. And yet it was happening. So how in the world is there going to be anything but endless literary controversy among a whole world of people trying to interpret the same book or collection of books, the same anthology called the Bible? When we have so many different levels of understanding affairs coming into discussion, so many different academic levels, so many different levels of education coming into it, so many different denominations coming into it, so many different levels of laity coming into it, so many different personal biases coming into it, so many different political agendas coming into it, so many different influences being inserted. How are we going to have anything but endless literary controversy? Over a book that starts right out with a bit of ambiguity, with such things as God said something to someone, yet there's also a corresponding idea that God is somehow absolute and changeless, the creator of the universe, the creator of the relative universe, in which things like language exists. This God changed the moment he spoke, didn't he? And this God being a he, what's he-ness have to do with it? He, she, masculinity, femininity, these are parts of the relative universe. These are aspects of the relative universe. So we have God that is part of the relative universe, creating the relative universe. Huh? And this God supposedly created the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, right? Who had 2 children, Cain and Abel, right? One of whom said, if I go over to the land of Nod, those people over there will kill me. Well, what were those people over there doing if Cain and Abel were the only 2 children of the first 2 people, Adam and Eve? And what did God mean when saying, repopulate the earth to Adam, Eve, Cain, or Abel? Go out and repopulate the earth. What is repopulating the earth doing there? Repopulating, if Adam and Eve were the first 2 people. Starts right out with what turns into endless literary controversy. And what is this Elohim, this plurality of this God? This we-ness spoken of at the very beginning of the whole anthology called the Bible, the King James Version of the Bible. Elohim, we, plurality. If it's plural, it's not absolute. If it's masculine, it's not absolute. If it talks, it's not absolute. If it walks, it's not absolute. If it gives instruction, it's not absolute. If it requires something of something else, it's not absolute. Debate over all such matters. Well, no wonder there's debate, because these things make no sense. Endless literary controversy is for sluggard minds. You can get involved in it if you want to. That's good news. It's there for you. Also, it's good news that you don't have to. What else? Jesus, the Son of God. Does this mean that God got a woman pregnant? I don't care how immaculately. Somehow God's sperm got involved with a human female, right? Isn't that what's insinuated? Isn't that what's implied? By way of a human female, God had a son in human form. This means that somehow God stooped so low as to get a human female pregnant. I don't care whether this God was an alien, a starseed, some kind of manifestation of a universal principle. I don't care. Some kind of higher being, some kind of plurality, some kind of... I don't care. It stooped low enough to get a woman pregnant by artificial insemination, something, all right? And then she gives birth to a child. Some kind of vulgarization of affairs has taken place here. I don't know what kind. And it would be endless literary controversy to get involved in trying to figure out what kind. And many people do get involved in this endless literary controversy of trying to figure out exactly what kind of affairs this really refers to. It is some kind of very vulgarized notion. And I don't really care what kind or version or category this vulgarization falls into. It doesn't matter. I don't have to get involved in that, and neither do you. And this, some kind of supernatural being getting a human female pregnant and creating the Son of God, creating some Savior, the good guy? Isn't this insemination or somehow mating with human females exactly the same thing that these other creatures called the sons of God, not to be confused with the Son of God, the good guy now, of course, right? Sons of God, apparently, also known as fallen angels, also did? Somehow inseminate, mate with human females? Isn't that the same activity? Somehow part of their fallen nature to have done so? Oh, but it's not fallen nature when God does it, huh? I'm not saying I know the truth over these matters. I'm saying there's something wrong with these affairs. And trying to figure it all out, even getting involved in in this kind of information, is to get involved in endless literary controversy. And what's endless literary controversy for? Sluggard minds. And what does it all amount to? Distraction. Son of God. I am not ignorant or ignorant of all kinds of different interpretations, levels of understanding of what these things mean. I am very familiar with many of the world's religions' views of such affairs, and their views of other religions' assessments of such affairs, and esoteric understandings of these affairs. I am very aware of them. I've studied them ever since I was a kid, because the stuff I was told when I was a kid didn't make much sense to me, especially in the face of endless literary controversy among a closed set of people who involved themselves in a closed system of thought. They were all thinking pretty much alike, and yet were involved in endless literary controversy even among themselves. This didn't make much sense to me, so I investigated. And I have found all levels of esoteric and exoteric interpretations of such affairs. You know, like what does Christhood really mean? What does Christ consciousness really mean? What does it refer to if it's referring simply to a state of consciousness? What does it mean? Oh, there's endless literary controversy over just that. Did some guy named Jesus, who was the Christ, really exist? There's endless literary controversy over that. Do I even really have to know about all of this? No. I had to learn a heck of a lot about all of it to come to the point where I just saw that it was endless literary controversy and that I was spending my life being distracted by it. I guess it was important to learn a lot about it for that reason. Does it do much for me? No. It keeps my mind going around in circles, caught up in distraction and endless literary controversy, which is for what? Sluggard minds. What's this Holy Sacrament thing? Eat of my flesh, drink of my blood? Some guy called the Son of God? Not to be confused, of course, with the sons of God, like I was saying, who are evil, bad guys, right? Or with the astrotheological, the potential roots of established religions, right? Astrotheological bases of most religions, or maybe even all religions. Astrotheological interpretation of the word Son of God. S-U-N of God. The sun in the sky. Which once every year, from a northern hemisphere point of view, dips below the equator 3 days out of the year, 3 days in a row, and then resurrects up above, comes back up above the equator again for the rest of the year, the 3 days of death, and then resurrecting back again, an astrotheological interpretation of the whole affair. Not to be confused with that either. Which is another bed of endless literary controversy. Not to be confused with that. The Son of God says, eat of my flesh, drink of my blood, in remembrance of me. This guy who was sacrificed, okay, a human sacrifice, that God set up, now says cannibalize for the rest of time. Metaphorically, eat my flesh, drink my blood. Another very vulgarized idea, right? So we have a God, okay, that walks, talks, at least talks, okay, talks, names himself as some plurality, inseminates, somehow impregnates a human female, the result of which is then sacrificed by this cosmic parent. This sacrificed guy then also says, eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. The results of a human sacrifice. Go ahead and cannibalize as well. Something's wrong. Is there going to be a second coming? I don't know. We're apparently getting all ramped up for it. Then supposedly also there's Lord Maitreya, something like that, that's already alive and well on this planet, and that is the second coming of Christ right there, already instantiated in the flesh on this planet, just hasn't been revealed yet openly. So apparently the return of Jesus already has taken place, but we're still waiting for it at the same time. This is not the first time within the last couple of 100 years that apparent paradox has been alive and well. And apparently we're waiting for some kind of alien invasion. Apparently there's one being, set up, perhaps a staged alien invasion to help bring in the new world order by getting us all to turn to the Antichrist. Well, and then the Antichrist is supposedly going to appear to be the Christ, and the Christ will be perceived as being the Antichrist, and oh my goodness, the levels of deception, trying to weed through all of that. What does all that amount to? Endless literary controversy. Distraction. And what is all that for? Sluggard minds. Do you have to get involved with it? No. Can you if you want to? Yeah. That's good news either way, right? If you don't want to get involved in endless literary controversy, insecurity, instability over it all, doubt, distraction, sluggardly mindedness. If you want to actually root your existential security in the absolute, Go ahead. This is there for you. If you want to get rooted and oriented in your true self, the one part of yourself, the only part of you, so to speak, that does not change, the immortal true self, go ahead. That would be your connection to that which is absolute. It doesn't mean you are the absolute. It means you have a connection to it. Go ahead. It's right there. It's right there. That's not a distraction. There's no endless literary controversy over something absolute, over the absolute. How many absolutes can there be? One. Is it pure consciousness? No. Consciousness is an attribute of the manifested cosmos. Saying that it is consciousness isn't talking about the absolute. It's qualifying the absolute with something that has to do with the manifested cosmos. The absolute is not qualifiable. You can't say that it's masculine, or that it is will, or that it is consciousness, or that it is this, or it is that. It just is. It just is. Regardless of the manifested cosmos, regardless of the relative universe, regardless of polarity, regardless of opposites, regardless of being. It's not a being. All of those are characteristics of the relative cosmos, the manifested cosmos, regardless of whether the cosmos is currently manifested or unmanifested. The absolute just is. Call it the causeless cause if you want to. A more accurate term is the absolute. Does it have to have a name like God, Yahweh, Allah, Krishna, whatever? No. And folks, the causeless cause of the manifested cosmos is not part of or an attribute of the manifested cosmos. No such thing can create the manifested cosmos. This absolute is not the collective whole of the manifested cosmos, because that can't create the manifested cosmos either. It's not the cause of it. And what's this about fallen angels mating with human females? Have you ever tried to mate a lion with a cow? Was the result a Lao? Half lion, half cow? Did that happen? Have you tried? If you have tried, it probably didn't work. Have you tried to mate a horse with, I don't know, a snake? Did you get a snorse? Did you try to mate a giraffe with a lemming? Did you get a giraffe? Or a gemming? No. Look, I wasn't there, and neither was anybody else who's currently engaged in endless literary controversy over these affairs. But I don't know that trying to mate an angel with a human being would work very well either. I mean, that's even more far out than trying to mate a giraffe with a lemming. And yet supposedly it happened. I don't know if it did or not. It just seems a little bit like something's wrong with the story to me. And they had offspring. They actually had offspring. Yes, the mating was successful. There was offspring who were giants. Now, I know that within the same species, let's say Homo sapiens, you mate, let's just say there's a pure history of blonde-hairedness with one of the two mating couples here, one of the two members of the mating couple, and then just a solid history of brown-hairedness with the other of the two we're mating here. Okay, so they mate. Now, their offspring, according to, genetics, right? There will be some blonde-hairedness that comes out of it. There will be some brown-hairedness that comes out of it. There might even be some blondes. But there's not going to be any green-hairedness that comes out of it. So how in the world do you mate an angel with a human, number one, number two, and then get a giant? Where does the giant come from? Where does the gianthood come in? Was it part of the human? Or was it part of the angel? I don't know. We have a fossil record that, apparently, indicates that there have been giants, Nephilim, the alleged offspring of the mating of angels with humans. Kind of like there being a son of God, being the result of God mating with humans. Kind of a parallel there, right? But anyway, does a fossil record prove that angels mated with humans? No. Look, the universe is creative. There's a lot of creativity going on in it. Things just pop up. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know and I don't care. But at some point, chickens suddenly appeared. And new species appear all the time. They also disappear for one reason or another. There is always some kind of evolvement, change happening in the manifested cosmos, in the world of change, in the universe of change. Alright? Things pop up. Things appear. There is always a becoming. There is always being and becoming. Looking at things like a fossil record and drawing conclusions about the cause behind the appearance of something that led to a fossil remains gets us swept up into what? Literary controversy. Which is for what? Sluggard minds. Which amounts to what? A distraction. If we are looking for any kind of grounding in anything absolute. If you want to get involved in all of that, go ahead. It's there for you. If it's somehow important to you, as part of a stepping stone, as a stepping stone to other things, fine. Don't let it become a stumbling block. At that point, it becomes nothing but a distraction. And you're engaging in nothing but sluggardly mindedness. Here's another one. I heard lately someone say, enlightenment just zaps people sometimes. They're just walking along and boom, they're enlightened. Boom, that's it. Oh. Well, I didn't know that. I still don't. I said, well, if that happens to someone, there's still more. And the person just looked at me like, huh? No, when you're enlightened, you're enlightened. Oh. So it just zaps people. No, there's always more, folks. There's always more. Don't get stuck at any point. Don't get distracted. I guess that's all I have to say about that right now. There's material here in my channel about movement toward true selfhood. The true self. The connection with the absolute. And the absolute. Of course, there's not much that can be said about that. Really. Just kind of some clarification over what it isn't, really. And when it comes to the true self, that involves a lot of what it isn't as well. You know, using the process of elimination to get to what there really just is. It's here in my channel. Endless literary controversy is for sluggard minds. You don't have to get involved in the distractions of it. But you can if you like. And that's good news either way you look at it. Be well.